The courtroom fell silent as Maya Rodriguez swept through the double doors. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced down storms before and lived to tell about it. Today would be different, though. Today wasn't just another case. 3 years as the lead prosecutor for the Southern District's Public Corruption Unit had hardened her. It had taught her which battles to pick and which to let go. But when the evidence against District Court Judge Eleanor Winters had landed on her desk 6 months ago, Maya knew this was a line in the sand she couldn't ignore. "All rise," the bailiff called out, his voice echoing against the marble walls. "The Honorable Judge Arthur Thompson presiding." Judge Thompson entered from his chambers, his robes billowing slightly with each step. At 72, his face bore the lines of someone who had seen justice served and denied in equal measure. The special appointment of Thompson to oversee this case had raised eyebrows across the legal community. A retired judge with an impeccable record stepping in to preside over the trial of one of his former colleagues. It spoke volumes about the sensitivity of what was about to unfold. "Be seated," Thompson said, his voice firm but not unkind. As the room settled, he peered over his glasses at the defendant's table. "This court is now in session. United States versus Eleanor Winters. Are both parties ready to proceed?" Maya rose, smoothing down her charcoal suit. "Prosecution is ready, Your Honor." At the defense table, Eleanor Winters sat with perfect posture, her silver hair swept into an immaculate chignon. At 65, she had spent the last 15 years on the federal bench, earning a reputation for harsh sentences and unwavering rulings. If she was concerned about sitting on the wrong side of the courtroom today, it didn't show on her face. Beside her, defense attorney Garrett Phillips stood. A former prosecutor himself, Phillips had built a lucrative private practice defending politicians and business executives caught with their hands in various cookie jars. "The defense is ready, Your Honor," Phillips said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of his Louisiana upbringing. Judge Thompson nodded. "Very well. Ms. Rodriguez, your opening statement." Maya approached the jury box, making eye contact with each of the 12 citizens who would determine Winters' fate. She had selected them carefully over 3 days of voir dire: teachers, engineers, a retired postal worker, a nurse. People who understood the value of rules and the cost when those in power broke them. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Maya began, her voice steady. "This case is about trust. When we elect officials, when we appoint judges, when we put people in positions of power, we trust them to act in the interest of justice, not self-interest." She paused, letting the words settle. Judge Eleanor Winters betrayed that trust. The evidence will show that for the past 5 years, she has been accepting bribes from private prison lobbyists. In exchange, she has handed down unusually harsh sentences that have filled these for-profit facilities and lined the pockets of their executives. In the gallery, a reporter from the Washington Post scribbled furiously in his notebook. The story had already made front-page news when the indictment came down. A federal judge on trial for corruption wasn't an everyday occurrence. You will see financial records showing deposits into offshore accounts linked to Judge Winters. You will hear testimony from defendants who received disproportionate sentences for minor offenses. And you will learn how a system meant to deliver justice was manipulated to deliver profit instead. Maya returned to her seat, aware of the weight of what she had just promised. The case was solid. She wouldn't have brought it otherwise. But Judge Winters was respected and connected. This wouldn't be easy. Phillips approached the jury next, his designer suit and confident smile presenting the image of a man who had never doubted himself a day in his life. "What Ms. Rodriguez has just described to you is a fantasy," he said, spreading his hands wide. "A conspiracy theory meant to distract from the fact that the prosecution has no actual evidence connecting Judge Winters to any wrongdoing." He walked slowly in front of the jury box, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "Judge Eleanor Winters has served this country for 15 years on the federal bench. Before that, she was a prosecutor who put away drug kingpins and corrupt politicians. She has devoted her life to upholding the law, not breaking it." He turned, gesturing toward Winters, who sat with her hands folded neatly on the table. "The prosecution will show you financial records and claim they prove corruption. But what they won't tell you is that Judge Winters' husband, before his death 3 years ago, was an investment banker with clients around the world. The accounts they're so suspicious of were perfectly legal investments managed by a grieving widow." Phillips returned to his seat, placing a supportive hand on Winters' shoulder. The judge's expression remained neutral, but Maya caught the slight tightening around her eyes. Phillips was good, no question. He knew how to play to a jury's sympathies. Judge Thompson cleared his throat. "The prosecution may call its first witness." Maya stood. "The United States calls FBI Special Agent Diana Chen." Agent Chen, a woman in her late 30s with a practical bob and a no-nonsense demeanor, took the stand and was sworn in. Maya approached, laying the groundwork of the investigation. The initial tip from a concerned clerk, the months of surveillance, the financial forensics that had led to today. "Agent Chen, can you explain to the jury what you found when you analyzed Judge Winters' financial records?" Chen nodded, her expression serious. "We discovered a pattern of deposits into an account in the Cayman Islands. These deposits, typically between $50,000 and $75,000, occurred within days of Judge Winters sentencing defendants to terms in privately run correctional facilities." Maya approached the witness stand with a stack of documents. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter these financial records as Government Exhibit A." "So noted," Thompson said. As Maya handed the documents to Agent Chen, Phillips rose. "Objection, Your Honor. These records were obtained without proper authorization. The warrant the FBI secured was overly broad and constitutes a fishing expedition." Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Ms. Rodriguez?" "Your Honor, the warrant was approved by Judge Michaels based on substantial preliminary evidence. It specifically covered financial records related to potential bribery." Thompson considered for a moment. "Objection overruled. You may continue, Ms. Rodriguez." Phillips sat down, but not before shooting a look at Winters that Maya couldn't quite interpret. She filed it away for later consideration. "Agent Chen, did your investigation reveal where these funds originated?" Chen nodded. "Yes. We traced the deposits back to a series of shell companies. Each shell company led to another, but ultimately, all roads led to Correctech Industries, one of the largest private prison operators in the country." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Maya caught the eye of Winters, who for the first time looked slightly unsettled. "And did Correctech Industries benefit from Judge Winters' sentencing decisions?" "Objection!" Phillips was on his feet again. "Calls for speculation." "I'll rephrase," Maya said smoothly. "Agent Chen, did your investigation reveal any correlation between Judge Winters' sentencing patterns and Correctech's prison population?" "Yes," Chen replied. "Judge Winters sentenced defendants to Correctech facilities at a rate 78% higher than any other judge in the district. The average sentence length was also 42% longer." Maya nodded. "Thank you, Agent Chen." She turned to the judge. "No further questions at this time, Your Honor." Phillips approached for cross-examination, his smile tight. "Agent Chen, in your investigation, did you find any direct communication between Judge Winters and anyone at Correctech Industries?" Chen hesitated. "No, we did not." "No emails? No phone calls? No text messages?" "No." "In fact, you have no evidence that Judge Winters even knew who owned these private prisons, do you?" Chen straightened. "We have circumstantial evidence." "Yes or no, Agent? Do you have any evidence that Judge Winters knew who owned these facilities?" "No direct evidence, no." Phillips nodded, satisfied. "And these offshore accounts you're so suspicious of, were they opened by Judge Winters herself?" "They were opened in the name of a trust established by her late husband." So you have no evidence that Judge Winters even knew these accounts existed, let alone controlled them? Chen's jaw tightened. The timing of the deposits? Yes or no, Agent Chen? No direct evidence, no. Phillips smiled. No further questions, Your Honor. As Agent Chen stepped down, Maya kept her expression neutral. Phillips had scored points, no question, but this was just the beginning. The foundation was laid. Now it was time to build the case. Judge Thompson checked his watch. We'll recess until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Court is adjourned. As the gallery emptied, Maya gathered her notes, aware of Winters watching her from the defense table. When she looked up, their eyes met, and for a brief moment, Maya saw something unexpected in the older woman's gaze. Not defiance or anger, but something closer to respect. A worthy adversary acknowledging another. Maya nodded slightly, then turned away. This wasn't personal. It was about justice. At least that's what she told herself. 3 days into the trial, the prosecution's case was building momentum. Maya had presented a parade of witnesses, former defendants who had received unusually harsh sentences from Judge Winters, clerks who had noticed patterns, financial experts who had followed the money trail. The evidence was mounting, and she could feel the jury's growing skepticism every time they looked at Winters. But she knew the real test was still to come. The United States calls Leonard Bridges, Maya announced. A stir went through the courtroom. Bridges was the surprise witness, the one whose name hadn't appeared on any pre-trial lists until 2 weeks ago. As the former CFO of Correctech Industries, his testimony could break the case wide open or destroy it entirely, depending on how he held up under cross-examination. Bridges entered through a side door, escorted by a U.S. Marshal. In his mid-50s, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he looked more like an accountant than a key player in a corruption scandal. Which, Maya supposed, was exactly what he was. After being sworn in, Bridges took his seat, his eyes flickering nervously around the courtroom before settling somewhere above the jury's heads. Maya approached slowly. Mr. Bridges, can you tell the court your former position at Correctech Industries? I was the chief financial officer from 2015 until my resignation 8 months ago. And why did you resign? Bridges shifted in his seat. I became aware of financial irregularities that made me uncomfortable. What kind of irregularities? Payments. Large payments being authorized without proper documentation. When I asked questions, I was told they were consultant fees, but the paperwork was never made available to me. Maya nodded. And what did you do with this information? Initially, nothing, Bridges admitted, his voice tinged with shame. I had a family to support, a mortgage, but the amounts kept growing, and the secrecy around them became more pronounced. What changed your mind? Bridges finally looked directly at the jury. My daughter. She's in law school. She came home for dinner one night and was talking about her ethics class. And I couldn't look her in the eye anymore. In the gallery, Maya noticed several jurors nodding slightly. Bridges was connecting. Mr. Bridges, did you eventually discover where these consultant fees were going? Yes. He took a deep breath. They were being routed through a series of shell companies and ultimately deposited in offshore accounts. The beneficiary of those accounts was listed as the Winters Family Trust. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Thompson banged his gavel once, restoring order. From the corner of her eye, Maya saw Judge Winters lean over to whisper something to Phillips. The defense attorney's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his pen. Mr. Bridges, were you ever told why these payments were being made to the Winters Family Trust? Not directly, no. But it was understood among the executive team that we needed to maintain a positive relationship with certain judges who could influence our occupancy rates. Objection. Phillips was on his feet. Hearsay and speculation. Your Honor, Maya countered, Mr. Bridges is testifying to what he personally observed and understood in his role as CFO. Judge Thompson considered for a moment. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Ms. Rodriguez. The jury will give this testimony the weight they deem appropriate. Maya nodded her thanks. Mr. Bridges, during your time at CorrectTech, did you observe any correlation between these payments and Judge Winters' sentencing patterns? Yes. We tracked the number of defendants each judge sent to our facilities. Judge Winters consistently ranked at the top. After each quarter where her numbers increased, another payment would be authorized. Phillips was taking rapid notes, his face flushed. Maya knew he would come at Bridges hard during cross-examination, attempt to paint him as a disgruntled employee seeking immunity for his own wrongdoing. Mr. Bridges, have you been offered any deal in exchange for your testimony today? He shook his head. Number, I've been advised that I could face charges for my role in these transactions. I'm here because it's the right thing to do, regardless of the consequences to myself. Maya nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. As Phillips approached for cross-examination, his usual smooth confidence had been replaced by barely contained anger. He stood directly in front of Bridges, invading his personal space. Mr. Bridges, isn't it true that you were passed over for promotion to CEO last year? Bridges blinked. Yes, but... And isn't it true that you're currently under investigation by the SEC for insider trading related to CorrectTech stock? There is an inquiry, yes, but it's unrelated to... So you're facing potential federal charges, and now you're testifying against a federal judge. Quite convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Maya stood. Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. Sustained. Phillips barely paused. Mr. Bridges, did you ever see Judge Winters receive any money directly? No. Did you ever hear her discuss these alleged payments with anyone at CorrectTech? No. Did you ever see a single document with her signature authorizing or acknowledging these accounts? Bridges hesitated. No. In fact, Mr. Bridges, isn't it true that you have no direct evidence connecting Judge Winters personally to any of these transactions? Bridges looked down at his hands. The accounts were in her family trust's name. A trust established by her late husband, Phillips corrected. A man who, as an investment banker, managed numerous accounts for numerous clients. Isn't it possible that someone was using this trust without Judge Winters' knowledge? Bridges hesitated. I suppose it's possible, but yes or no will suffice, Mr. Bridges. Yes, it's possible. Phillips nodded, satisfied. No further questions, Your Honor. As Bridges stepped down, Maya could feel the momentum shifting. Phillips had created reasonable doubt, not much, but enough to plant a seed. She needed something more, something definitive, that would connect Winters directly to the payments. Judge Thompson checked his watch. We'll break for lunch and reconvene at 1:30. As the courtroom emptied, Maya remained at her table, reviewing her notes. The prosecution had one more key witness scheduled for the afternoon, a former clerk of Judge Winters who claimed to have overheard conversations about the CorrectTech arrangement. But the testimony would be circumstantial at best, and after Bridges' cross-examination, she wasn't sure it would be enough. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice the young woman approaching until she stood directly in front of the prosecution table. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm sorry to interrupt. Maya looked up to find a woman in her early 30s, clutching a leather portfolio to her chest. She was well-dressed but visibly nervous, her eyes darting around the courtroom. Can I help you? Maya asked. My name is Valerie Winters. I'm Judge Winters' daughter-in-law. She lowered her voice. I have something you need to see. The courtroom was packed as proceedings resumed at 1:30. Word had somehow spread that something big was about to happen, and reporters were packed into the gallery like sardines, sketch pads ready since cameras weren't allowed. Maya sat at the prosecution table, outwardly calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Beside her, her second chair, Tom Ramirez, leaned in. Are you sure about this? He whispered. If it backfires, Maya gave a slight nod. It's authenticated. IT confirmed it. Across the aisle, Winters and Phillips were engaged in intense conversation, their heads bent close together. Winters looked more animated than Maya had seen her throughout the trial, her composure finally showing cracks. Judge Thompson entered, and court was called to order. "Ms. Rodriguez, you may call your next witness," Thompson said. Maya stood. "The United States calls Valerie Winters." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. At the defense table, Judge Winters froze, her face draining of color. Phillips dropped his pen, scrambling to retrieve it as he whispered urgently to his client. Valerie entered through the side door, her steps hesitant, but her chin high. She wore a simple navy dress, her dark hair pulled back in a low ponytail. As she passed the defense table, she didn't look at her mother-in-law. After being sworn in, Valerie settled into the witness chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Ms. Winters, can you please tell the court your relationship to the defendant?" Maya began. "I'm married to her son, Michael Winters. We've been together for 8 years, married for 5. "And what is your profession?" "I'm an attorney. I specialize in estate planning." Maya nodded. "Did you help establish the Winters Family Trust?" "No," Valerie said. "That was set up before I met Michael. His father established it about 10 years ago." "When did you first become aware of irregularities with the trust?" Valerie took a deep breath. "After Richard, my father-in-law, passed away 3 years ago. Eleanor became the sole trustee. Michael and I noticed unusual activity in the quarterly statements." "What kind of unusual activity?" "Large deposits that didn't match any of the investments we knew about. When we asked Eleanor about them, she said they were returns from private equity investments Richard had made before his death." "Did you believe her?" Valerie hesitated. "At first, yes. I had no reason not to. But the pattern seemed odd, and the amounts were very specific. Not the kind of rounded numbers you typically see with investment returns." "What did you do with these concerns?" "I tried to investigate discreetly. As an estate attorney, I have some experience with trusts. I requested documentation from the bank, but I was told that only the trustee, Eleanor, could access those records." Maya approached the witness stand, holding a tablet. "Ms. Winters, I'm showing you what has been marked as Government Exhibit J. Do you recognize this document?" Valerie looked at the screen and nodded. "Yes. It's an email I found on our home computer last month." "Can you explain to the jury what this email contains?" "It's a message from someone named Davis at a company called Pinnacle Consulting. It's addressed to Eleanor, thanking her for her continued partnership and confirming a deposit of $75,000 following, quote, the successful placement of 17 new residents last quarter." The courtroom was dead silent now, every person holding their breath. "And how did you come to find this email?" "Michael and I share a home office. He had logged into his mother's email account to help her with some technical issues. She's not very good with computers. He must have forgotten to log out. When I used the computer later, I saw these messages." Maya nodded. "What did you do with this information?" Valerie's voice wavered slightly. "Nothing at first. I was shocked, confused. Then I found more emails, going back years. Discussions of quotas, placement rates, financial arrangements." "Objection!" Phillips was on his feet. "Your Honor, these alleged emails were accessed without Judge Winters' consent. They constitute illegally obtained evidence and should be suppressed." Judge Thompson looked at Maya. "Ms. Rodriguez?" "Your Honor, the emails were accessed on a family computer by family members who had legitimate access to that device. There was no government involvement in obtaining them initially. Ms. Winters voluntarily brought them to our attention as a concerned citizen." Thompson considered for a moment. "I'll allow it for now, but I expect a full brief on this issue by tomorrow morning. Continue, Ms. Rodriguez." Maya turned back to Valerie. "Ms. Winters, why did you decide to come forward now?" Valerie looked directly at her mother-in-law for the first time. Because it's wrong. Because people's lives were being traded for profit. Because my husband and I are expecting our first child, and I couldn't bear the thought of bringing them into a world where I stayed silent about something like this. A tear slid down Valerie's cheek, but her voice remained steady. I love my family. I didn't want to do this, but sometimes love means holding people accountable. At the defense table, Judge Winters sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable. But her hands, clasped tightly together, had begun to tremble. Your witness, Maya said to Phillips. Phillips approached slowly, his usual confidence subdued. He knew, as everyone in the courtroom knew, that the case had just shifted irrevocably. Ms. Winters, he began, his tone gentler than Maya had expected. This must be very difficult for you. Valerie nodded slightly. Your husband, Judge Winters' son, does he know you're here today? Yes, she said quietly. He drove me to the courthouse. Phillips blinked, clearly surprised. And he supports your decision to testify against his mother? He's struggling, but he believes in the truth. Phillips changed tactics. The emails you discovered, you said they were on a family computer. Isn't it possible they were sent to Judge Winters without her knowledge or consent? Perhaps as part of a scam or phishing attempt? Valerie shook her head. These weren't just incoming messages. There were replies, discussions about specific cases, scheduling calls, and they matched perfectly with the deposit dates in the trust accounts. Phillips tried another angle. Ms. Winters, isn't it true that you and the defendant have had a strained relationship over the years? We've had our differences, yes. In fact, just last Thanksgiving, didn't you have a significant argument about political views? Valerie's eyes narrowed slightly. We disagreed about immigration policy, yes, but that has nothing to do with why I'm here. Doesn't it? Phillips pressed. You disagree with her judicial philosophy, her sentencing practices. Isn't this just another way to undermine her? Objection, Maya called. Assumes facts, not in evidence, and argumentative. Sustained, Thompson said. Phillips tried one last approach. Ms. Winters, the trust in question, who are the beneficiaries? Michael and I, and any children we might have. So by testifying today, you're potentially harming your own financial interests, correct? Valerie lifted her chin. Some things are more important than money, Mr. Phillips. Phillips had no response to that. After a moment, he returned to his seat. No further questions. As Valerie stepped down, her eyes met her mother-in-law's. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but acknowledgement. Then she was gone, the courtroom door closing softly behind her. Maya rose. Your Honor, the prosecution rests. Judge Thompson nodded. Very well. We'll adjourn until tomorrow morning when the defense will present its case. As the gallery emptied, Phillips conferred intensely with Judge Winters. Maya gathered her notes, trying not to appear too confident. The emails were damning, but Phillips was skilled. He would find some way to create doubt, to suggest alternative explanations. She was about to leave when she noticed Judge Winters standing at the defense table alone, Phillips having stepped away to take a call. On impulse, Maya approached. Judge Winters. The older woman looked up, her expression resigned. Ms. Rodriguez. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Winters said quietly, You remind me of myself, you know. 30 years ago. Before ... Before what? Maya asked when Winters didn't continue. Before I forgot why I became a judge in the first place. She straightened her jacket with dignity. It wasn't always like this. I believe that's important for you to know. Maya studied her, seeing not just a corrupt judge but a woman who had lost her way, step by incremental step. What happened? Winters gave a small, sad smile. Power, opportunity, 1,000 small compromises that seemed insignificant at the time. And then one day, you can't recognize yourself anymore. Phillips was returning, his face grim. Winters straightened, her moment of vulnerability vanishing behind her judicial mask. "Good day, Ms. Rodriguez." Maya nodded and turned away, her thoughts troubled. Justice would be served. She was certain of that now. But there was no satisfaction in watching a life unravel, even one that deserved it. On the morning the jury was set to deliver its verdict, rain lashed against the courthouse windows, turning the gray stone exterior even darker. Maya stood in the restroom, staring at her reflection. The past 2 weeks had been a grueling marathon of testimony, evidence, and legal arguments. After Valerie Winters' bombshell testimony, the defense had mounted what counterattack it could. Character witnesses testified to Winters' dedication to the law. Financial experts suggested alternative explanations for the suspicious deposits. Phillips had even put Judge Winters herself on the stand, a risky move that had yielded mixed results. She had maintained her innocence with convincing dignity, but under Maya's cross-examination, inconsistencies had emerged that couldn't be easily explained away. The door opened behind her, and her boss, U.S. Attorney James Mitchell, entered. In his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and a perpetually worried expression, Mitchell had initially been reluctant to pursue the case against Winters. "Ready?" he asked, straightening his tie in the mirror beside her. Maya nodded. "As I'll ever be." "Whatever happens," Mitchell said, "you've done exemplary work. This wasn't an easy case." "It's not about easy," Maya replied. "It's about necessary." They walked together to the courtroom, which was packed beyond capacity. News of the case had spread nationally, raising questions about judicial corruption across the country. Several other investigations had already been opened, prompted by the evidence presented in Winters' trial. As Maya took her seat at the prosecution table, she caught sight of Valerie and Michael Winters, sitting in the back row. Michael, a younger male version of his mother with the same sharp features and penetrating gaze, sat with his arm protectively around his wife's shoulders. When he noticed Maya looking, he gave a small, solemn nod. Judge Thompson entered, and the room rose. "Be seated," he said. "I understand the jury has reached a verdict." "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson replied. "Very well. Please bring in the defendant." Eleanor Winters entered from a side door, escorted by a marshal. She had lost weight during the trial, her judge's robes now hanging slightly loose on her frame. But she held her head high as she took her place beside Phillips, who whispered something in her ear. Thompson nodded to the clerk. "Please read the verdict." The clerk stood. "In the case of United States versus Eleanor Winters, on the count of conspiracy to commit bribery, we find the defendant guilty." A murmur swept the courtroom. "On the count of honest services wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty." Winters didn't move, didn't blink. "On the count of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty." Phillips placed a hand on Winters' arm. Her composure finally cracked, just slightly, a tremor passing across her face like a stone disturbing still water. "On the count of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty." The clerk sat down. Judge Thompson turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, thank you for your service. You are discharged." He turned to Winters. "The defendant's bail is revoked. Sentencing will be scheduled for 4 weeks from today." As the marshals approached to take Winters into custody, she finally turned to look at her son in the gallery. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Accusation, grief, love, and loss, all tangled together in a single glance. Then Michael stood, helping Valerie to her feet, and they left without looking back. Maya watched as Winters was led away, her shoulders finally slumping as the door closed behind her. It was over. Justice had been served. So why did victory taste so hollow? Outside the courthouse, rain still fell as Maya pushed through the crowd of reporters, deflecting questions with practiced ease. The justice system worked as it should. No one is above the law. The U.S. Attorney's Office will have a formal statement later today. She was almost to her car when a voice called her name. She turned to find Michael Winters standing under an umbrella, Valerie at his side. "Mr. Winters," Maya said, uncertain. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not for prosecuting my mother, that was your job, but for the way you did it, with respect, without turning it into a spectacle." Maya nodded. She made mistakes, serious ones, but that doesn't erase a lifetime of service. "No," Michael agreed. "It doesn't." He hesitated. "She asked to see us. Before sentencing. I don't know if we're going to go." "That's a personal decision," Maya said carefully. "But if I may, whatever you decide, make peace with it. Don't let regret be another casualty of this case." Valerie stepped forward, taking Maya's hand. "Thank you. For everything." As they walked away, Maya stood in the rain, watching them go. The case would make her career. Everyone was already saying so. High-profile conviction, national attention. There was talk of a political future if she wanted it. But standing there in the rain, all she could think about was Eleanor Winters sitting alone in a cell, a life of accomplishment now forever shadowed by corruption. How thin the line was between justice and tragedy, between right and wrong. How easy it might be to cross that line, one small compromise at a time. Maya turned and walked to her car. There would be other cases, other judges, other battles. The work of justice was never finished, never perfect. But today, in this case, the system had worked as it should. The truth had come to light. Accountability had been enforced. It would have to be enough. As she drove away from the courthouse, the rain finally began to ease, slivers of sunlight breaking through the clouds. A new day with all its possibilities and pitfalls stretched out before her. Maya Rodriguez straightened her shoulders and drove on.